Hi, I'm Vicky Johnson-Dahl. This is Winchell. It's designed by Edward Everett Winchell, art director of the Matthews Northrop Printing Works in Buffalo, New York, around the turn of the century. And that's just a little bit for map historians who might know that name. This talk is not about that. Let's talk about locator maps. Locator maps are a specific kind of inset map that shows the location on your main map and how it fits into the world. It's a small map, often in the corner, and I'm not going to show you how to make them. There's robust documentation for that in both ARC and QGIS. Instead, I'm going to show you how to elevate your locator maps. These are things to consider that are very easy, require little technical skill to implement. You really just have to think outside the box a little bit, because the standard locator map is pretty dry, right? This is practical cartography day, and what is more practical than taking a very dull part of your workflow and having some fun with it? So for a long time, I considered these to be really boring, and I avoided using them whenever possible. But there are cases where you have to, where your map user really needs that extra bit of place marking to help them orient themselves. So here we go. 10 minutes, 10 tips for how to elevate your locator maps. The first one, consider the frame. Adding a drop shadow is the single easiest way to make your locator map pop. It's a flat box shifted down and to the side, just a little bit. It takes a second to add, and it gives the impression that your locator map is floating above the map, adding a little visual dimension. I like a box for this, but a blur shadow effect is nice too. And here's an example. Because of the nature of my work, you're going to see a lot of pretty blank maps. Just imagine some content on there. It doesn't really affect the locator maps. So this is just a plain map. This is the same map with a drop shadow. And here, again, with a blur shadow. It doesn't affect the content of the map. It just makes it look a little sharper. These take seconds to implement. Box or a shadow below the inset layer shifted. It's simple, it's quick, and it's effective. Number 2, consider the outline. Like I was saying about thinking outside the box, just throw out the box entirely. How much of the outside area of your map do you really need? You can save a lot of space by having your map float on its own. And here's an example. This is a map, I really just labeled satellite imagery from Maxar that I put together right after the Kakhovka Dam failure. Our Ukraine team knew where it was located in country, but it's not, or wasn't at that point, a well-known place outside of that, so there's just a little country locator. Like this, it's a frame. Having the bordering countries, they don't add anything. You want to know where the dam is in Ukraine. You don't need to know what's bordering it. You don't need to have all of that extraneous information. Consider the placement. If someone tells you to close your eyes and picture a locator map, it's in the upper left corner probably. I don't know why someone would ask you to do that, but you know, it's early. It can be anywhere, including the header or off the map entirely. So this map request was to highlight 4 states in a Google slide format, 4 states in Burma. And Burma is a very portrait orientation country, and Google Slides are only landscape. So I could fully fit all of these maps on one slide, and I still had room left over, so I put the locator map in a central column. You have to use all of the space available to you. And not shown here, but it's also a really good way to cover up areas that are messy or complicated and are relevant to your product. Disputed borders that are incidental to your map. If it's something likely to invite problems not related to or possibly distracting from your content, just cover it up. Number 4, consider the branding, by which I mean consider how it will fit in with the map or maps. And this works especially well when you're working with strict limitations, map standards, or design guidelines. It adds a little personality. The example here is some Iraq province and city reference maps. They were made to very specific guidelines for the header and footer. It's a pre-made template framework that was given to me. And by putting the locator maps in little badges, little circles, to match the circle of the header, it's thematically consistent with the foundational characteristics of the map set, and it keeps the maps cohesive but still unique. Number 5, consider the labels. Text is precious on a map. It also takes up a lot of space. I have a theory that the longest names are always given to the smallest polygons. I have some iffy math to back that up. I would love to talk to you about it later. Future cartographic perspectives article. In an inset, in the constrained space, you have to make tough calls. And what I'm suggesting here, of course, is leave off as many as possible. Here's a map from the 30-day map challenge from a few years ago. The locator is of the African continent, and nothing is labeled. It doesn't need to be. The relevant areas are labeled on the main map, and the rest is familiar context. The other country names would add nothing to the user's understanding of what's being shown here. They would just be a lot of very small text in a very small area. Leave them off. Number 6, consider the extent. How much do you really need to show? What is the minimum necessary so the viewer can orient themselves? And what is the maximum that is still sensible for the context? Work in that middle space to identify a scale that does the most for you. The example here, this is my map in the map gallery, or I guess the top half of it. Moldova is highlighted as Europe's most cartographically fascinating country, so it makes sense to have Europe as the locator. You want more than just the immediate area, but you don't need the whole world. And you can cut off the other areas that are superfluous, so there's no North Africa on there. It kind of cuts off parts of Asia. And this is also an example of placement using the header space. I really like the jaunty little bits sticking out over the main map. It's fun. Number 7, consider the marginalia, or rather, consider no marginalia. This map doesn't need a north arrow, especially if there's one on your main map and the orientation of your inset is the same. It almost certainly doesn't need a scale bar if it's just for reference. Since you've already seen all of the maps with no marginalia, here's one where you might expect to see it. It's another 30-day map challenge map looking at the Niagara frontier. And as folks might remember from a WAPO talk at NACIS in Norfolk 2018, north is a societal construct. But when you play with those assumptions, you have to make sure that your map user can still orient themselves. So this is looking at the north, looking from the north at an oblique angle onto the northernmost part of Western New York. You can turn the viewer's expectations on their head, maybe literally, and save the marginalia by keeping it at the same oblique angle as the main map. This one serves double duty because it's also showing the view perspective, which is much easier than having a separate diagram to explain that. Number 8, I don't have a great title for this one. Consider the other stuff. Most of these tips have been about doing less. And now that we've removed all of that other extraneous clutter, your map has room for more useful purposes. What other contextual information can you include on the locator that broadens the map's overall utility? Here's a 30-day map challenge map from a few years ago where I've used the US as both a locator map for DC and as a way to enhance the main argument that the map is making. Number 9, consider the view scale. This one comes with the previous tip. You gotta keep an eye on that other stuff. I work mostly in static and print maps, and you can save yourself a lot of time by viewing the map actual size or printing it out before the final deadline. The text on locator maps can get pretty small. You want to make sure that you keep it legible. It can be a nasty surprise right at the end when you think you're finished, and you have to go back and rearrange and redesign so that the locator is usable. So this is an example of what doesn't work. Here's a locator map that I pulled from a map of Syria talking about refugees and IDPs. And it looks okay. It's a locator map to which I added some other stuff. And it was to be a table drop at a meeting. So this is kind of what it looked like on the printed page. Even blown up on a monitor that big, you can't read it. Not great. Had to start over. Number 10, finally, if you take anything from this talk at all, consider recycling. You make a locator map that you like, great. You just saved future you a bunch of time. When you're making a locator map, keep the foundational document, keep the layers clean and labeled so you can paste that onto your next map. You can adjust the content, the extent indicator, the aesthetics, but you should never have to recreate the structure unless you absolutely have to. My job, and probably a lot of the jobs of us here, rely on us being able to do good work on the fly. Save yourself those precious minutes, copy and paste. Some more empty maps here, but, ooh, and an empty legend. When I supported OTI's Guatemala program, I made a map of the week, and it was just whatever interesting data I could find. I didn't know much about Guatemala going into it. So it was a way to educate me and keep the program interested. And so whatever interesting data I could find typically focused on the Western Highlands area. And this is just a few. I made dozens of these maps, but I only made one locator. All right, that's all. go forth and locate. If you have any questions, put them in the Slack or see me at the break.